Hello, and welcome to Now Where Were We? A series of short videos about the history of Olympia, Lacey, and surrounding areas. Your host for this program is Deborah Ross. In this series, Deb takes us to locations that inform us about the history of our community. She also visits with local historians. We welcome your feedback and suggestions.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Now Where Were We? An ongoing series of videos about the history of Olympia, Lacey, and surrounding areas. My name is Deborah Ross, and this is going to be the third installment of what I'm calling a series of iconic intersections. Intersections in Olympia and Lacey that tell something about a theme of our local history. And today we're going to be focusing on transportation history, particularly the history of rail traffic and transportation in Olympia. And I'm very, very privileged and pleased to have with me today Jim Hannum, who is our go-to local historian on the history of rail traffic and transportation in Olympia. Thank you so much for being here today, Jim.
Well, it's very nice to be here. I'm pleased that you asked me to come.
And you now have written 3 books about local railroad history, is that right?
That's right. 2 of them are available at local bookstores, and all 3 of them are at the Timberland libraries.
And they are a great resource. I've read all 3 and refer to them over and over again, so thank you for sharing that knowledge and love of railroad with our community. So now let's start with talking about Olympia's railroad history. Where was the first railroad in Olympia itself?
Well, that was the Olympia and Tenino Railroad that was completed and opened for business about 1878, and it ran on the other side of what is now Capitol Lake. At that time it was just part of Budd Inlet, but it ran from the north side of the 4th Avenue Bridge that existed back then all the way to Tenino.
Were there other railroads in Olympia?
Well, at about 1890, a lot of different companies decided that Olympia was worth serving by rail, and so there were actually 3 other railroads that were active at that time. The Port Townsend Southern bought the Olympia and Tenino Railroad and enlarged it from being a narrow gauge line to a standard gauge railroad, and they built their tracks, at least in this area, on the shore of what's now Capitol Lake instead of on pilings. And they put in their station about 100 feet west of where the original station was. And then there was the subsidiary of the Union Pacific Railroad was attempting to enter Olympia in 1890, and they did a fair amount of grading here and there, and actually constructed the tunnel that runs under Capitol Boulevard in Tumwater. But they kind of got behind in their financing and never really completed their line, and it never actually had any track laid for it.
So did the Union Pacific ever get into Olympia?
Yeah, eventually they were able to build their own line in here around 1916, and that line came in from East Olympia and went to a Union Pacific freight and passenger station that was on 4th Avenue downtown here.
And that's the current site of the pet store on 4th Avenue, is that right?
Right.
Now, in 1959, there was a fairly dramatic incident that happened at that depot. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, from what I read in the papers, there was a crew that had stopped to do something about 2 miles outside of downtown Olympia, and for some reason they didn't properly set the brakes on about 15 cars, and they rolled away. Apparently there's a slight downhill grade between there and downtown, so they were going at a pretty good clip when they hit the Union Pacific depot downtown, and I think one person died, several were injured, and the place was a real mess for a while.
It's amazing that only one person was killed in that whole incident.
I think so, yeah. The Northern Pacific was the third one, and they did complete their line from Tacoma down through Olympia and on to Grays Harbor, and that's the line that constructed this tunnel underneath 7th Avenue now that comes out over here near the lake.
So a number of viewers might not be aware that you and I are basically standing either on top of or very close to on top of a tunnel. Is that right?
Right. You just don't notice that as you're driving around the streets of downtown here. You have to go west a little ways down the hill, and then you can look back into the tunnel.
So we're now at the Northern Pacific Depot. It's a replacement depot of the original one. Is that right, Jim?
The original depot was called the Water Street Depot, and it was built when the Northern Pacific came to Olympia in 1890. It apparently had gotten pretty dilapidated, and what you see behind us here now was built in 1968, and it was a combination depot and freight house.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the trolley system. We are here at this intersection of 7th Avenue and Capitol Way, and at one point this was a busy place for our trolley system. How did that come about?
Well, the trolley system, more or less the main line of the trolley system that actually went into operation, went up and down Capitol Way. And it also went to several other places. It went across the 4th Avenue Bridge into West Olympia, and at one time it had several branches also. In fact, the first one to actually build a street railroad was a man named George Savage, and he had some second-hand cars that he got from the Seattle Street Railroad, and these were drawn by horses, and the service was apparently pretty terrible and lots of complaints about it. But Olympia Power and Light Company started its system in 1892, and they had the upper hand because they were the people who made the electricity down in Tumwater. So any other company that would have been competing with them was at a disadvantage because they would have to buy their power from this company, which certainly wouldn't have been selling it to them at any sort of good rate. So they went out and had the franchise for the entire Olympia Tumwater trolley system. Trolley system was pretty extensive at one time, and not only did it go to West Olympia, it also went to Percival Landing. That was mostly for delivering barrels of beer from the Olympia Brewery for transit by ship. And then along Capitol Way here, there was another branch that went down right across the street from where we are right now. This little road here called Amanda Smith Way was built as a branch of the trolley, and it was used to take beer down to the Olympia Brewery's bottling plant that was right behind the Northern Pacific Railroad station down there. And then further down to the south here, there was a branch that went up into the state capitol campus for a while. And then in Tumwater, there was a significant branch that went down to the oldest Olympia brewery. So they were pretty active for a while.
And when did they cease operation?
They quit operating, I think it was in December of 1931, when the Olympia Power and Light Company sold it to the Olympia Transit Company, and the Olympia Transit Company quit operating the trolleys that same day and started using buses. So that was it for the trolleys, although the tracks were still here on Capitol Way until it was repaved in 1936.
Are there any remnants left of the trolley system that we can see?
Very, very few. There is one of the power poles that is still up along Capitol Way here, just a few blocks from here, at the corner of 11th and Capitol. On the southeast corner, there's a single pole that for some reason was fortunately left standing. So it's not very outstanding in its appearance, but if you look for it, you can see it down there. And a few years ago, and I haven't really checked lately, you could still see where the trolley ran on the south extension of Capitol Way, just before Capitol Boulevard turns and crosses Interstate 5. The rails had been taken up, but the place where the trolley tracks were was paved over, and you could see it sort of going down there and curving out to where it used to cross over land, of course, before they dug that all out to put in Interstate 5.
Well, this has been a great history, and thank you so much for just introducing us to the history of rail traffic and transportation in Olympia. Sure. Thanks.